Today I want to argue that Steven Universe is not actually a show about magical space rocks fighting each other. It is not a show about a kid learning to summon a shield, or going on adventures with his 3 alien guardians, or saving the world from a galactic empire, even though all of those things happen in it. What Steven Universe actually is, underneath the bright colors and the singing and the beach city summers and the fusions and the fight sequences, is a show about a woman who did terrible things for complicated reasons, and the son who inherited both her powers and the consequences of every single decision she ever made, and what it costs a child to spend their entire adolescence cleaning up the mess left behind by a parent they never got to meet. We are going to go through 12 sections tonight, covering everything from the surface level stuff that everyone already knows, the gems, the diamonds, the war, all the way down to the parts of this show that sit so deep beneath the surface that once you see them, the whole thing looks different. We are going to talk about Pink Diamond and the lie that lasted 4 seasons. We are going to talk about a character named Spinel, who stood in a garden for 6,000 years because someone she loved told her to wait, and she did. We are going to talk about international censorship and the fight Rebecca Sugar had to wage against their own network just to put a wedding on screen. We are going to talk about what the show did with mental health in its final season that most cartoons would never even attempt. And we are going to talk about the question that sits at the very bottom of the iceberg, the one the show has been asking since the first episode, which is whether it is possible to love someone who hurt people, and whether that love is worth holding onto when the person is gone, and the damage is still here. This is the Steven Universe iceberg. Settle in. This is going to take a while. And by the time we reach the bottom of it, the show you thought was about a kid and his magical guardians will look like something else entirely. But before we begin, I would just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It is completely free, and it really does help us keep making videos like this one. Anyway, that is enough. Let us begin. The surface. What Steven Universe looks like from the outside. Steven Universe premiered on Cartoon Network on November 4th, 2013. And if you had only watched the first few episodes, you would have been forgiven for thinking it was a fairly straightforward animated adventure show. A kid named Steven Universe, voiced by Zach Callison, lives in a small seaside town called Beach City with 3 alien women made of gemstones who protect the earth from monsters. There is Garnet, voiced by the singer Estelle, who is stoic and strong and rarely speaks more than she needs to. There is Amethyst, voiced by Michaela Dietz, who is loud and messy and eats things she probably should not be eating. And there is Pearl, voiced by Dee Dee Magno-Hall, who is precise and anxious and deeply devoted to the memory of someone who is no longer there. Together, they are the Crystal Gems, and Steven is their youngest member, half human and half gem, trying to figure out how his powers work while also just being a kid who likes ice cream and cartoons and hanging out at the Big Donut with his friend Lars. The basic setup is simple enough. Steven's mother, Rose Quartz, was the leader of the Crystal Gems. She gave up her physical form to bring Steven into the world, which in gem terms means she essentially ceased to exist so that he could be born. Her gemstone, a pink quartz set in what looks like a belly button, is now embedded in Steven's stomach. He has inherited her powers, or at least the potential for them, and part of the show's early appeal is watching this awkward, earnest kid gradually learn to activate abilities that were never designed for a human body. The show was created by Rebecca Sugar, and this is worth pausing on because who Rebecca Sugar is matters enormously to understanding what this show was trying to do. Sugar was born on July 9th, 1987, in Silver Spring, Maryland. Before Steven Universe, she was a writer and storyboard artist on Adventure Time, another Cartoon Network series, where she was responsible for some of the show's most emotionally resonant episodes and for writing several of its most beloved songs, including I Remember You and the Marceline and Ice King material that made grown adults cry at a cartoon about a stretchy boy and his dog. When Cartoon Network commissioned Steven Universe, Sugar became the first non-binary person to independently create a series for the network. Before coming out as non-binary, Sugar was described as the first woman to do so. They are bisexual, non-binary, and genderqueer. and their identity shaped this show at every single level in ways we will get to later. The title character is loosely based on Sugar's younger brother, Steven Sugar, who also worked on the show as a background artist. During development, Rebecca repeatedly asked her brother whether naming the show after him was a good idea. She stopped asking when it was commissioned. He was fine with it. He trusted her to use his name wisely. The show ran for 5 seasons and 160 episodes, concluding on January 21st, 2019. A television film, Steven Universe the Movie, premiered on September 2nd, 2019. And an epilogue limited series, Steven Universe Future, ran from December 7th, 2019 to March 27th, 2020. Across all of that, the show won a Peabody Award in 2018 for Children's and Youth Programming, a GLAAD Media Award in 2019 for Outstanding Kids and Family Program, and earned Rebecca Sugar 7 Primetime Emmy nominations across her career. Those are the surface level facts. That is what the show looks like if you read the Wikipedia page and maybe watched a few clips. A colorful, warm, musical animated series about a sweet kid and his alien family. And all of that is true. The colors are real, the warmth is real, the music, and there is a lot of music, is genuinely beautiful. But what was happening underneath all of that, the thing the show was actually building toward from the very first frame, was something much larger and much darker and much more carefully constructed than the surface suggested. Because here is the thing about Steven Universe that becomes clear only in retrospect. The show was hiding something. For 4 entire seasons, across years of real-world television, it was telling you a story about a heroic rebellion leader named Rose Quartz, who fought to protect the Earth from a galactic empire. And that story was almost entirely built on a lie. Not a lie the show was telling its audience carelessly. A lie the show was telling its audience on purpose, patiently, with the full intention of pulling it apart at exactly the right moment and making you rethink everything you had seen up to that point. But before we can understand what the show was hiding, we need to understand the world it built, the Gem Empire, the Diamond Authority, and the war that started everything. The Gem Empire, colonialism in crystal. The gems in Steven Universe are not just pretty aliens with gemstones for body parts. They are a species, an entire civilization. And the way that civilization works is one of the most carefully designed pieces of world building in modern animation. Understanding it is essential to understanding why everything in the show goes the way it does, and why the decisions that individual characters make carry the weight that they carry. Gems are sentient gemstones. That is the starting point. A gem's physical body, the humanoid form you see walking around and talking and fighting, is actually a hard light projection generated by the gemstone itself. The gemstone is the real gem. The body is a construct, a projection, something a gem can change and reform if it gets damaged. When a gem takes enough physical damage, the body dissipates entirely in a process called poofing, and the gemstone is left behind, vulnerable and exposed until the gem regenerates a new form. If the gemstone itself is cracked, the gem becomes unstable, glitching and malfunctioning in ways that are painful and disorienting. And if the gemstone is shattered, broken into pieces, the gem is effectively dead. Those pieces retain fragments of consciousness but cannot reform into a whole being. Shattering is, in the world of this show, the closest thing to permanent death that gems experience. Gems are created, not born. They emerge from the ground in massive industrial operations called kindergartens, which are essentially mining operations in reverse. Instead of pulling resources out of a planet, kindergartens inject gem material into the planet's crust and use the planet's life force, its organic energy, to grow new gems inside the rock. The gems emerge fully formed from the holes they grow in, shaped and sized according to their type, and the planet they grew in is left drained, barren, hollowed out from the inside. The process of making gems kills worlds. This is not a background detail. This is the foundation of the entire conflict. The Gem Empire is a colonial power in the most literal sense imaginable. It exists by consuming planets. It lands on a world, builds kindergartens, drains the planet dry, produces new gems, and moves on. The planets it leaves behind are dead, empty husks stripped of everything organic, everything living, everything that was there before the gems arrived. At the top of this empire are the diamonds, 4 of them, or at least 4 that we know of. White Diamond, the oldest and most powerful, who controls gem society from the gem homeworld, with an authority that is presented as absolute and unquestioned. Yellow Diamond, who runs the military and the administrative functions of the empire, efficient and cold and brilliant at logistics. Blue Diamond, who manages diplomacy and governance with an emotional sensitivity that is both genuine and weaponized. She can project her feelings onto others, making entire rooms full of gems feel her grief or her rage, whether they want to or not. And then there is Pink Diamond, the youngest, the smallest, the one who was given Earth as her very first colony. Below the diamonds, Gem Society is organized into a rigid caste system based entirely on what kind of gem you are. Your gem type determines everything. Pearls are servants, made to stand beside higher-ranking gems and look pretty and hold things and never speak unless spoken to. Rubies are small, expendable foot soldiers, treated as functionally interchangeable. Lapis Lazulis are terraformers, designed to reshape entire planets to suit gem colonization. Bismuths are builders and architects. Quartzes are warriors, large and strong, bred for combat. Sapphires can see the future and are valued for their aristocratic calm and their precognitive abilities. Every gem knows their place because the system was built so that knowing your place was the only option available to you. Deviation from your assigned role is not just discouraged. It is treated as a defect. A gem that does not match the expected qualities of its type is called an off-color, and off-colors in gem society are considered embarrassing failures, things to be hidden or disposed of rather than beings with their own value. The system does not have room for individuality because individuality threatens the structure, and the structure is the point. The show builds this world slowly across multiple seasons, revealing pieces of it at a pace that lets you understand the scale of what you are looking at. Early episodes give you small details. An abandoned kindergarten on Earth where amethyst was made. A mention of homeworld as a place the crystal gems cannot return to. The gradual realization that the gems who live with Stephen are not representatives of their species in any normal sense. They are deserters, rebels, the survivors of a war that nearly destroyed this planet, and did destroy almost everyone who fought in it. And at the center of all of this, the war, the colony, the caste system, the drain of worlds was one diamond who looked at what her people were doing to Earth and decided to stop it. Or at least, that is what everyone believed for the first 4 seasons of the show. That version of events, the one where a brave Quartz soldier named Rose stood up against the Diamond Authority and fought a 1,000-year war to save the Earth, is the story the crystal gems tell Stephen. It is the story they tell themselves. It is the story the audience is given as the show's foundational truth. And it is wrong. Not in its events necessarily. Many of the things that happened did happen, but the person at the center of it was not who anyone thought she was. And the reasons behind her choices were far more complicated and far more damaging than the simple heroism of the story she left behind. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this, please consider subscribing. It is completely free, and it genuinely helps us keep making these videos. But to understand the lie, you first have to understand the version of events that everyone in the show, the Crystal Gems, Stephen, the audience, believe was true for years. The rebellion, the war for Earth, and the woman who supposedly started it. The rebellion, Rose Quartz, and the war for Earth. For the first 3.5 seasons of Steven Universe, the story of Rose Quartz is presented as a narrative of heroism. It is the founding myth of the Crystal Gems, the story they tell Stephen about his mother, the legend that shapes how they understand themselves and their place in the universe. And for a long time, It is a genuinely beautiful story. Rose Quartz, as the crystal gems describe her, was a quartz soldier, a member of the warrior caste, one of many produced in Earth's kindergartens, designed for combat and colonial defense. But unlike the quartzes around her, Rose saw something in the planet she had been made on that the other gems could not see or chose not to. She saw the organic life, the plants, the animals, the humans, all of it growing and changing and dying and being replaced in cycles that gems, with their eternal static existence, had no framework for understanding. Rose did not just notice organic life. She fell in love with it. She fell in love with the idea that things could grow and change and become something different from what they started as. Because in gem society, nothing ever changed. You were made for a purpose, and you fulfilled that purpose forever. Rose saw a world where that was not true, where everything was in constant motion, constantly becoming, and she decided it was worth protecting. When Homeworld's colonization of Earth began in earnest, when the kindergarten started draining the planet and the gems began reshaping the world to suit their purposes, Rose made a decision. She would fight. She would stand against her own people, against the Diamond Authority, against the entire structure of gem civilization, to protect the Earth and everything living on it. She founded the Crystal Gems, a rebel army made up of gems from across the caste system, who had each, in their own way, found reasons to reject what Homeworld was demanding of them. Pearl was one of the first to join her. The show establishes early that Pearl's devotion to Rose is not just loyalty. It is love, deep and consuming and not entirely reciprocated in the way Pearl needs it to be. Pearl was made to be a servant, designed to be ornamental and obedient, and Rose gave her the chance to be a warrior instead. Pearl fought in the rebellion not just for Earth, but for Rose specifically, and the distinction between those two motivations is something the show examines with increasing honesty as the seasons go on. Garnet was not originally a single entity. She is a fusion, a permanent combination of two gems, a ruby and a sapphire, who met during the war and discovered that being fused together felt more like themselves than being separate ever had. In gem society, fusion between different types of gems is forbidden. Cross-gem fusion is considered disgusting, an aberration, something to be punished and stamped out. Ruby and Sapphire fused accidentally and were immediately targeted for destruction by Homeworld. Rose Quartz was the first person who ever looked at their fusion and said that what they had become was beautiful. That moment of acceptance is what brought Garnet to the rebellion, and it is one of the most carefully planted seeds in the entire show, because Ruby and Sapphire's relationship would become one of the most important things the show ever did, both narratively and culturally. Amethyst was not part of the war at all. She emerged from her kindergarten hole long after the fighting was over, alone and confused and unaware of what she was supposed to be. The Crystal Gems found her and raised her, and her entire arc across the series is about grappling with the fact that she was made to be a weapon for the people her family fought against, and that she emerged too late and too small and technically defective by Homeworld standards. She is supposed to be a big, intimidating quartz soldier. She came out short and wild and nothing like what the system designed her to be. The war lasted roughly 1,000 years, which is a long time by any measure, but especially long when you consider that many of the people fighting in it are functionally immortal and experience every single one of those years. The rebellion was brutal. Gems were shattered on both sides. Rose fought against soldiers, against generals, against the institutional might of an empire that controlled thousands of planets and considered Earth a minor colony barely worth the resources being poured into it. And then, according to the story the Crystal Gems tell Steven, the decisive moment happened. Rose Quartz shattered Pink Diamond. The diamond in charge of Earth's colonization, the youngest member of the Diamond Authority, was destroyed by a quartz soldier from her own colony. This was unprecedented. No diamond had ever been shattered before. The axe sent shockwaves through the entire gem empire and changed the course of the war permanently. In retaliation for the loss of Pink Diamond, the remaining 3 diamonds did something catastrophic. They unleashed a combined attack on Earth, a blast of light from all three remaining diamonds at once, aimed at every gem still on the planet's surface. This attack, which the show calls the corrupting light, did not shatter the gems it hit. It did something arguably worse. It corrupted them. It scrambled their forms and their minds, turning gems into monstrous, mindless creatures, unable to speak or think or remember who they had been. Every gem on Earth that was not shielded from the blast was corrupted. Both crystal gems and homeworld soldiers, both rebels and loyalists. The diamonds did not care about the distinction. They destroyed everything on the planet as punishment for what Rose had done. Rose was able to shield herself, garnet, and pearl from the corrupting light. Amethyst was still in the ground and was protected by the rock around her. But everyone else, the hundreds or thousands of gems who had fought on both sides of the war, was gone. Not dead, technically. Corrupted. Trapped in monstrous forms with no way to be restored. The crystal gems spent the next several thousand years finding these corrupted gems and containing them, bubbling their gemstones to keep them safe until someone could figure out a way to heal them. Rose won the war. Earth was saved. But the cost was staggering. Almost everyone she had fought beside was lost. The planet was damaged. And the story she left behind, the heroic narrative of a brave soldier who stood up for what was right and made the ultimate sacrifice by shattering a diamond, became the foundation on which the crystal gems built their identity for thousands of years. There is a character the show introduces in Season 3 who becomes central to understanding the moral complexity of the rebellion, and who later becomes even more important once the pink diamond twist is revealed. Bismuth is a blacksmith, a builder, one of the original crystal gems who fought in the war. She is loud and warm and fiercely loyal, and she designed every weapon the rebellion used in combat. She also designed one weapon that Rose refused to allow her to use, a weapon called the Breaking Point, designed specifically to shatter diamonds. When Bismuth presented the Breaking Point to Rose, arguing that the only way to win the war was to destroy the Diamond Authority permanently, Rose did not just refuse. She fought Bismuth and she won, and she bubbled Bismuth's gemstone and hid it inside Lion's Mane, where it stayed for thousands of years. She told the other crystal gems that Bismuth had been lost in battle. She lied about what happened the same way she lied about everything. When Steven discovers Bismuth and releases her, the show uses the situation to ask a question that most children's cartoons would never touch. Was Rose right to reject the Breaking Point? On one level, yes. The show's moral framework opposes shattering and treats the preservation of life, even the lives of enemies, as a foundational principle. But on another level, Rose rejected the Breaking Point for reasons that had nothing to do with pacifism. She was Pink Diamond. She was the diamond Bismuth wanted to shatter. She refused to allow the rebellion to develop a weapon that could kill her because she was the person it would be used against, and she dressed that refusal up as a moral principle while hiding the real reason behind it. Bismuth spent thousands of years bubbled and forgotten because she got too close to a truth that Rose could not afford to let anyone see. The show also introduces a group called the Off-Colors, gems who do not conform to Homeworld's standards for their type. There is a Rudel that emerged as conjoined twins sharing one body. There is a Rhodonite, who is a fusion of a ruby and a pearl, a cross-cast fusion that would be considered an abomination on Homeworld. There is a Padparacha Sapphire, who can only predict things that have already happened rather than seeing the future, which Homeworld considers defective. And there is Fluorite, a fusion of 6 gems who moves and speaks with the slowness of someone who has been thinking about the same thing for a very long time and is not in a hurry to finish. The Off-Colors live in hiding beneath the surface of Homeworld, in the tunnels and abandoned spaces that the Empire does not bother to monitor, surviving by staying invisible. They are the gem equivalent of people who do not fit into the system and who have been forced underground by a society that cannot tolerate what they are. When Lars sacrifices himself to save them. When Steven revives him with his healing powers and Lars becomes pink and immortal and changed in ways he cannot fully understand, the Off-Colors become Lars's crew. They become the people who follow him into space, who trust him, who build a new life alongside him, far from the world that rejected them. And they are the crew that the upcoming sequel series, Lars of the Stars, will follow into the parts of the gem empire that the original show never had time to explore. Rose eventually fell in love with a human musician named Greg Universe. She became fascinated by humanity in a way that went beyond academic curiosity and into genuine emotional connection. She and Greg had a relationship that was complicated by the fact that Rose was an immortal alien being who had lived through 1,000 years of war, and Greg was a guy with a van who played guitar. But the show presents their love as real and messy and imperfect and true. When Rose became pregnant with Steven, she knew what it would mean. Creating a half-human, half-gem child required Rose to give up her physical form permanently. Her gemstone would become part of Steven. She would, in a very real sense, cease to exist so that he could begin to exist. She made that choice. Steven was born. Rose was gone. That is the version of events the show presents for its first 3.5 seasons. It is a beautiful story about sacrifice and rebellion and the courage to fight for something worth protecting. And it held together for years, both within the show and in the audience's understanding of what they were watching. There is an element of the show's world building that deserves its own space here, because it becomes central to everything that follows. And that is fusion. Fusion in Steven Universe is the process by which two or more gems combine their physical forms into a single, larger, more powerful being. On the surface, it looks like a combat mechanic, a way for gems to become stronger by merging together. But the show treats fusion as something much more complicated and much more emotionally loaded than a simple power boost. Fusion requires synchronization. It requires the gems involved to be in emotional alignment, to trust each other, to want the same thing in the same moment. A fusion that is forced or held together by one participant's dominance over the other is unstable and painful and produces something monstrous rather than something beautiful. The show makes this explicit through the character of Jasper, who forces lapis lazuli into a fusion called malachite. Malachite is not a partnership, it is a prison. Lapis holds the fusion together by sheer willpower, not because she wants to be fused with Jasper, but because keeping Jasper trapped inside the fusion is the only way to stop Jasper from hurting Steven. The relationship is codependent and destructive, and the show is unflinching about presenting it as something horrific rather than romantic, despite the visual language of two figures embracing. Lapis Lazuli herself is one of the show's most haunting characters. She is a gem who was trapped inside a mirror for thousands of years, held as a tool by the crystal gems, who did not even realize she was a person. When Steven frees her, she is angry and traumatized and desperate to get home to Homeworld, a place she eventually discovers has changed so much in her absence that it is no longer recognizable as home. Her arc across the show is about the impossibility of going back, about what it means to be displaced from your origin, and about the slow, painful process of learning to build a life somewhere new, when the place you came from no longer exists in the form you remember. The healthy fusions in the show are presented as relationships. Garnet, the fusion of Ruby and Sapphire, is explicitly a love story. Two gems who found each other across the rigid lines of the caste system, and who experience their fused form as more themselves than their individual forms ever were. Stevani, the fusion of Steven and his best friend Connie Mahaswaran, is presented as the experience of being truly known by another person, the vulnerability and joy and occasional terror of letting someone else all the way in. Opal, the fusion of Pearl and Amethyst, is presented as what happens when two people who disagree about almost everything find the specific point of overlap where they can coexist. Each fusion is a different kind of relationship rendered as a literal new being, and the show uses this mechanic to talk about intimacy, consent, trust, and connection in ways that go far beyond what most animated shows attempt. And then there is the period between the war and Steven's arrival, which the show addresses mostly through implication and occasional flashback. For thousands of years after the corrupting light, the crystal gems lived on Earth alone. 3 survivors, Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl, in a ruined temple on a beach, managing the aftermath of a war they won at the cost of almost everyone they knew. They fought corrupted gems. They protected Beach City. They waited for something they could not name and that never quite arrived. And they grieved, each in their own way, for the thousands of years that stretched between the war's end and the arrival of the child who would change everything. Pearl grieved by building. She organized. She planned. She maintained the temple and cataloged the corrupted gems and kept the systems running with the precision of someone who would collapse if she stopped moving. Her grief looked like competence, which made it easy for the people around her to miss how deep it went. Garnet grieved by being present. She became the rock that the others leaned on, the stable center of a small and fragile family. And the cost of that stability was that she rarely allowed herself to show how much she was carrying. Ruby and Sapphire, inside her, processed the grief in different ways and at different speeds. And the show occasionally reveals moments where Garnet comes apart, where the fusion destabilizes because the two people inside her cannot hold the same feeling at the same time. Amethyst grieved by refusing to grieve. She was wild and loud and messy, and she treated every serious moment as an opportunity for a joke because the alternative, sitting quietly with the enormity of what the crystal gems had lost, was something she was not equipped for. She had never known the gems who were corrupted. She had never fought in the war. Her grief was secondhand, inherited from the people who raised her, and the show is sharp enough to recognize that secondhand grief is still grief, and that being the youngest person in a household of mourning shapes you, whether you understand what you are absorbing or not. Into this household, this quiet house of 3 grieving aliens on a beach, Stephen was born, and everything changed again. The show hid the truth for 4 seasons. It planted clues in plain sight, let fans theorize and argue and piece things together. And then in one single episode in season 5, it confirmed what some had suspected and devastated everyone who had not seen it coming. The twist. Rose Quartz was pink diamond. The episode is called A Single Pale Rose. It is the 18th episode of the 5th season. It aired on May 7th, 2018, as the second half of a 2-part special alongside the preceding episode, Can't Go Back. It was directed by Kat Morris and Liz Artinian, and written and storyboarded by Danny Kilgore and Hilary Florido, from a story by Matt Burnett, Ben Levin, Kat Morris, Joe Johnston, and series creator Rebecca Sugar. Sugar described these 2 episodes as huge episodes that they had been building to for a very long time, episodes that would have major implications for the rest of the series and would change viewers' interpretations of everything that came before. That description turned out to be an understatement. The episode begins with Stephen trying to get answers from Pearl about what really happened to Pink Diamond. He asks her directly whether she was the one who shattered Pink Diamond, and Pearl does not answer. She seems physically unable to answer, shocked and unable to form the words. Later, Stephen receives a text message from Pearl that reads, "I want to tell you, but I can't," followed by a see no evil emoji. The phone was stored inside Pearl's gemstone, and Stephen realizes the answer he needs is in there too. What follows is one of the most brilliantly structured episodes the show ever produced. Stephen enters Pearl's gem and finds himself inside her mind, moving backward through layers of memory. He passes through Pearl's ability to compartmentalize, through her traumatic memories of Rose's pregnancy, through the aftermath of the Gem War. He arrives at the moment after Pink Diamond's shattering and sees gem shards on the ground and what appears to be Rose Quartz holding her sword and crying. And then he steps closer and realizes that the figure holding the sword is not Rose at all. It is Pearl. Pearl shapeshifted into Rose Quartz's form. Pearl staged the shattering. Stephen goes deeper. He arrives inside Pink Diamond's palanquin, the ornate carriage that diamonds travel in, and he hears a conversation between Rose and Pearl. Pearl is hesitant about what Rose is asking her to do. Rose insists. She tells Pearl that after this, they will be free. Pearl reluctantly agrees. And then, as Stephen watches, Rose reverts into her true form. Rose Quartz was Pink Diamond. Pink Diamond faked her own death. She created fake diamond shards from compressed dirt, swallowed them so they would appear to come from inside her body, shapeshifted permanently into her Rose Quartz disguise, and had Pearl carry out the staged assassination in front of witnesses. And then, as her final command as a diamond, the last order she ever gave using her authority over Pearl. She told Pearl to never speak of what really happened. This was not a request, it was a diamond's command, and it physically sealed Pearl's ability to discuss the truth. For thousands of years, Pearl carried the secret inside her, unable to tell anyone, watching as the people she fought beside built their entire identity around a story that was fundamentally untrue. Steven texts Pearl back in the real world and is pulled out of her mind. He stands in the house he grew up in, surrounded by the people who raised him, and says it quietly. My mom was Pink Diamond. Behind him, Amethyst and Garnet gasp. The episode ends. The episode was viewed by 0.74 million viewers on its initial broadcast. It received critical acclaim for Dee Dee Magnahall's performance as Pearl, for the quality of the artwork, for the structure of its storytelling, and for the significance of the twist to the broader narrative of the series. And significant does not begin to cover it. Think about what this twist does to everything that came before it. Rose Quartz did not rebel against her diamond. She was the diamond. The entire rebellion was led by the person it claimed to be fighting against. The gems who joined the crystal gems, who risked their lives and watched their friends get shattered and survived the corrupting light, and spent thousands of years managing the aftermath, believed they were following a brave soldier who had stood up to an unjust system. They were following the system's own ruler in disguise. Rose did not shatter a tyrant. She staged her own fake death to escape the responsibilities of being a diamond. The war was real. The damage was real. The shattering of soldiers on both sides was real. The corrupting light that turned hundreds of gems into monsters was real. But the story that framed all of it, the story that said this was a rebellion of the oppressed against the oppressor, was built on a foundation that was fundamentally dishonest. Pink Diamond did not fight the system from below. She abandoned her post from above and let everyone around her believe a different version of events. And the foreshadowing had been there the entire time. Rebecca Sugar confirmed that clues were planted throughout the series from very early on. In Rose's Scabbard, a first season episode, Rose tells Pearl that they could never go home if they won the rebellion. That line makes no sense if Rose is a quartz soldier born on Earth because Earth is already her home, but it makes perfect sense if she is a diamond who can never return to Homeworld because she is supposed to be dead. Sugar confirmed in an interview that this line was intentional foreshadowing of the Pink Diamond reveal. There are more clues scattered across the first 4 seasons. Things that look like normal dialogue or minor inconsistencies on first viewing, but that take on entirely new meaning once you know the truth. The way Pearl sometimes acts not like a friend to Rose but like a servant, slipping into patterns of deference that are deeper than loyalty. The way the show draws Pink Diamond's mural on the moon base and Rose Quartz's appearance and quietly makes them the same height, the same build, the same basic silhouette. The way the show specifically avoids showing the moment of the shattering from any angle that would reveal what actually happened. The show planted the truth and then spent years letting you look at it without seeing it. And when the reveal came, it did not feel like a trick or a gotcha. It felt like the entire show had shifted beneath your feet, like one of those optical illusions where you suddenly see the other image hidden inside the picture and can never unsee it again. But the emotional devastation of the twist is not about plot mechanics. It is not about the cleverness of the foreshadowing or the elegance of the reveal. The emotional devastation is about what it means for Steven. His mother was not a rebel hero who made a noble sacrifice. She was the ruler of the very system she claimed to be fighting. A person who lied to everyone she loved for thousands of years, and then left her son to inherit the consequences of those lies without even telling him what the lies were. Steven's gem is Pink Diamond's gem. The same gem that once sat in the belly of a galactic ruler who abandoned her post, faked her death, deceived her followers, and started a war that destroyed everyone around her. Steven carries that gem in his stomach. He carries her legacy. And from this point forward, in the show, every time someone calls him Pink, every time a diamond looks at him and sees their sister instead of a child, Every time the consequences of Pink's choices come crashing back into his life, Steven is paying for something he did not do, carrying a weight he did not choose, being held responsible for a person he never met. That is the real twist of A Single Pale Rose. Not that Rose was Pink Diamond. That Steven has been inheriting damage he did not create from the moment he was born. And the consequences of those lies did not just affect Steven. They affected someone who spent 6,000 years standing in a garden, waiting for her best friend to come back. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this, please consider subscribing. It is completely free, and it really does help us keep making these videos. Spinel, and the cost of being left behind. Steven Universe. The movie premiered on Cartoon Network on September 2nd, 2019, and it introduced a villain named Spinel, who might be the single most emotionally devastating character in the entire franchise. Not because she is the most powerful or the most evil or the most complicated in terms of her plan. Her plan is actually fairly straightforward. She wants to destroy the Earth because the person she loved most abandoned her, and the Earth is where that person went. What makes Spinel devastating is why she is the way she is, and what her backstory says about the person who made her that way. Spinel was created to be Pink Diamond's playmate. That was her entire purpose. In the gem caste system, where every gem is made for a specific function, Spinel was made to be a companion, a friend, a source of entertainment and joy for the youngest diamond. She lived in a special garden world that was created just for Pink, a beautiful isolated space where the two of them played together. Spinel's whole existence was making Pink happy. Bouncing around, stretching her elastic body into funny shapes, doing anything and everything to get a smile. She was good at it. She was made to be good at it. When Pink Diamond received her colony, the Earth, she changed. She had something new, something bigger, something that demanded her attention in ways that Spinel's games could not compete with. And rather than having a difficult conversation with Spinel, rather than telling her that things were changing and that their relationship was going to be different now, Pink Diamond chose the path she would choose over and over again throughout her existence. She avoided the hard thing. She told Spinel to stand in the garden and wait for her, told her it was a game, told her to stay perfectly still and not move until Pink came back. Pink Diamond never came back. She left the garden, took Pearl with her, went to Earth, started a colony, fell in love with the planet, started a rebellion, faked her own death, fought a 1,000-year war, fell in love with Greg Universe, gave up her physical form to create Steven, and ceased to exist. And for all of that, for every single year of those 6,000 years, Spinel stood in the garden, waiting. Not because she was imprisoned, not because she was physically unable to leave, because the person she trusted and loved most in the universe told her to wait. And she did. Rebecca Sugar explained in an interview with comicbook.com why Pink left Spinel behind. The thing about Spinel, Sugar said, is that she is a little overwhelming. Pink was trying to get away from her. That is the honest answer. Pink found Spinel exhausting, found her constant need for attention and play and engagement to be too much. And rather than dealing with that honestly, she abandoned a living being in a garden for 6 millennia using a lie dressed up as a game. When Spinel finally learned the truth, when a broadcast from Steven to the universe revealed that Pink Diamond had become Rose Quartz and was now gone entirely, Spinel's world collapsed. Everything she had waited for was not coming. The person she had waited for had lived an entire life, multiple lives really, without her, had found new friends and new loves and new purposes, and had never once thought to go back to the garden and tell the person standing there that the game was over. Pink Diamond had not forgotten Spinel in the way you forget where you left your keys. She had known Spinel was there and had chosen every single day for 6,000 years not to go back. Spinel's anger is the anger of someone who gave everything to a relationship and discovered that the other person had moved on without telling them. It is recognizable. It is human. And it is made infinitely worse by the scale of it. 6,000 years of standing still while the person you loved changed the entire galaxy without you. The movie resolves Spinel's story by having Steven help her find a new purpose with the other diamonds, blue, yellow, and white, who are themselves grieving Pink's absence and who welcome Spinel as a companion they genuinely need and appreciate. It is a warm ending. It is also, the show is careful to suggest, only the beginning of a very long process. 6,000 years of abandonment is not undone by a single act of kindness. Spinel has to rebuild herself from a foundation that someone else shattered, and the person who shattered it is not around to apologize. Spinel's story is devastating on its own, but it becomes even more painful when you understand it as part of a pattern. Because Pink Diamond did not just leave Spinel. She left everyone. She left the diamonds who, for all their flaws, genuinely loved her, and spent thousands of years grieving her loss. She left Pearl carrying a secret that Pearl never asked to carry. She left the crystal gems believing a story that was not true. She left Greg with a love story that was missing its most important chapters. And she left Steven with all of it. Every piece of the mess, every consequence of every decision she ever made. And she was not around to explain any of it. There is someone in Steven's life whose relationship to this mess is different from everyone else's and who deserves to be talked about here because the show handles him with a specific kind of tenderness that is easy to overlook. Greg Universe, Steven's father. He is a human man. He was a musician who lived in a van, who met Rose Quartz at a concert, and who fell in love with a being he did not fully understand. He was not deceived in the same way the crystal gems were deceived because he knew less to begin with. Rose never told him she was Pink Diamond. But Rose also never told him she was a 1,000-year-old alien warrior who had faked the assassination of a galactic ruler. What she told him was something closer to what she told everyone. A simplified, curated version of herself that left out the parts she did not want to face. Greg's love for Rose was genuine. The show takes this seriously. It does not treat Greg as a joke or a fool for loving someone who was not entirely honest with him. The episode We Need to Talk, the same episode that was censored in the UK for its queer content, is also one of the most honest depictions of interspecies romance in animation. Greg and Rose try to fuse together and they fail, because fusion requires a kind of mutual understanding that they have not yet reached. Greg confronts Rose about the gap between them, about the fact that she seems to find humans fascinating the way someone might find a nature documentary fascinating, interesting, and beautiful, but not quite real. Rose's response is to drop the performance and talk to him honestly for what seems like the first time, and the conversation that follows is the beginning of a genuine relationship between two very different beings who are choosing to try. Greg raises Steven mostly alone after Rose is gone, with help from the crystal gems, but without a partner. His grief over Rose is quiet and continuous. He does not perform it the way Pearl performs it, with visible devotion and frequent references to what they lost. Greg's grief is the kind that sits in the background of a person's life, visible in the van he still lives in the songs he no longer writes, in the way he talks about Rose with a tenderness that has a specific kind of ache in it. The ache of someone who loved a person who was larger and more complicated than he ever fully understood. Greg is not a deadbeat dad, and the show is insistent about this. He is a man who was handed a situation no human being has ever been prepared for, raising a half-alien child whose powers are unpredictable and whose heritage is tied to a galactic war. And he did the best he could with what he had. The show acknowledges in future that his best was not always enough, Doctor. Mahaswaran's conversation with Greg about Steven's trauma is one of the show's most uncomfortable moments because it forces Greg to confront the possibility that the unconventional, freedom-focused childhood he gave Steven, the lack of structure, the absence of formal schooling, the living situation, was not the kindness he thought it was, but a form of neglect dressed up in good intentions. And then there is Connie. Connie Mahaswaran is Steven's best friend and eventually his romantic partner, and she is the most important human character in the show, for a reason that has nothing to do with her skill with a sword or her ability to fuse with Steven into Stevani. Connie is important because she is the one person in Steven's life who sees him clearly from the beginning. She does not see Rose Quartz's legacy. She does not see Pink Diamond's gem. She does not see a savior or a leader or a diamond's heir. She sees a boy who is kind and weird and trying his best, and she loves that boy specifically, not the mythology attached to him. When Connie and Steven fuse into Stevonnie for the first time, the show treats it as one of the most significant moments in the series. Stevonnie is a being who represents what it feels like to be truly known by another person. The vulnerability and joy and occasional terror of letting someone else all the way in. And in future, it is Connie who remains the steadiest point of connection Steven has. She is planning her own life, studying, growing, becoming someone independent of Steven. And the show argues that this independence is not a rejection, but a gift. The gift of being loved by someone who does not need you to be their whole world. Pink Diamond's pattern was avoidance. When something was difficult, when a conversation was going to be uncomfortable, when a truth was going to cause pain, she found a way around it. She faked her death instead of confronting the other diamonds directly. She sealed Pearl's mouth instead of trusting her to keep the secret willingly. She told Spinel to wait instead of saying goodbye. She became Rose Quartz instead of being Pink Diamond, and dealing with what being Pink Diamond actually meant. And the person who inherited the consequences of all that avoidance was a child who never asked for any of it, who spent his entire adolescence cleaning up damage he did not create, being held responsible for choices he did not make, by people who could not fully see him because they were still looking at his mother. The identity crisis. Steven is not Rose, but he is not Rose. The central question that sits underneath every single episode of Steven Universe, the question the show asks more often and more carefully than any other, is a simple one. Who is Steven? Not in the philosophical abstract sense that stories sometimes ask that question. In the very specific, very concrete sense of whether Steven Universe is his own person or whether he is, in some fundamental way, a continuation of his mother. Whether he is responsible for what she did. Whether the people around him are relating to him or to the memory of someone who is gone. Steven has Rose Quartz's gem. This is the foundational fact of his existence. Rose gave up her physical form so that Steven could exist, and her gemstone, the pink gem that was once set in her navel, is now set in his. The gem is the source of his powers. It is the reason he can summon a shield, the reason he can heal people with his saliva, the reason he can fuse with other gems and with Connie, his human best friend and eventual romantic partner. It is also the reason that people who knew Rose look at him and see her, not always consciously, not always on purpose, but persistently, and in ways that shape how they treat him. The gems around Steven spend the first season doing this constantly. Pearl loves Steven, genuinely loves him, but her grief over Rose's loss bleeds into everything. She sometimes looks at Steven with an expression that is not quite looking at Steven. She is looking at the gem. She is looking at the last trace of the person she devoted her entire existence to. And the child attached to that gem is someone she cares about deeply, but also someone she did not choose and who represents the thing that took Rose away from her. Rose chose to become Steven. Rose chose Greg. Rose chose humanity over Pearl, and Pearl has been carrying that specific grief for Steven's entire life. Garnet handles it differently because Garnet handles most things differently, with a calm that sometimes reads as wisdom and sometimes reads as avoidance. But even Garnet, who is arguably the most emotionally stable of the crystal gems, occasionally slips. There are moments where she talks to Steven about Rose, and the line between talking to him and talking through him to a woman who is gone gets uncomfortably thin. Amethyst has the least complicated relationship with Steven, partly because she has the least complicated relationship with Rose. Amethyst never met Rose during the war. She was raised by the crystal gems after emerging from the kindergarten, and she grew up hearing about Rose the way Steven did, as a story, as a legend, as someone who was amazing and brave and gone. Amethyst does not look at Steven and see Rose because she never knew Rose the way Pearl and Garnet did. She looks at Steven and sees Steven, and there are moments in the show where that simple act of seeing him as himself, not as a reflection of someone else, is the most valuable thing anyone gives him. But it is Homeworld's reaction to Steven that makes the identity crisis existential, rather than just emotional. When gems from Homeworld encounter Steven, they do not see a human child with a gem in his stomach. They see Pink Diamond. Jasper, the Homeworld soldier who arrives on Earth in the first season finale, calls him My Diamond the moment she realizes whose gem he carries. The diamonds themselves, when they eventually meet Steven, treat him as Pink returned to them. They call him Pink. They project their grief and their love and their expectations for a relationship that ended thousands of years ago onto a teenager who has no idea how to carry any of it. They do not understand that Steven is his own person because in their worldview, the gem is the identity. If Steven has Pink Diamond's gem, then Steven is Pink Diamond. The idea that he could be something new, something the gem had never been before, is so far outside their frame of reference that it does not occur to them until he forces the issue. The show's definitive statement on this question comes in the season 5 finale, Change Your Mind. White Diamond, the most powerful gem in existence, physically pulls Steven's gem from his body. She is convinced that Pink Diamond is hiding inside him, using a human disguise the way Pink once used a Rose Quartz disguise, and that removing the gem will reveal the truth. She is so certain that Pink is in there that she does not consider any other possibility. When the gem separates from Steven's body, what forms is not Pink Diamond and not Rose Quartz. It is Pink Steven, a glowing pink figure that is unmistakably Steven. It looks at White Diamond and says one word in a voice that shakes the room. She's gone. That is the answer. Pink Diamond is not hiding. She is not waiting to come back. She is gone. The gem belongs to Steven now. It has always belonged to Steven. And when it is reunited with his human half, when the two Stevens run toward each other and become whole again, the fusion of gem and human that results is definitively, unambiguously Steven Universe, his own person, not his mother's continuation. That moment is the show's clearest statement that Steven is not Rose. But the show is also honest enough to recognize that a single dramatic moment, no matter how definitive, does not erase years of identity confusion. Being told by the people around you, explicitly or implicitly, that you are your mother takes a toll that does not disappear because your gem said otherwise. The damage of growing up in the shadow of someone else's identity, of having your own selfhood constantly questioned or overwritten, is real, and the show follows that damage all the way to its conclusion. Pearl loved Rose. She served Rose for thousands of years, kept her most devastating secret, fought her war, watched her fall in love with a human man, watched her choose to become a child rather than continue existing, and has been carrying the grief of that loss for Steven's entire life. Pearl's relationship with Steven is one of the most complex in the show because it requires her to love a child who is made from the person she lost, and to do that without projecting the loss onto the child. She does not always succeed. The show does not pretend she does, but she tries. And the trying is its own kind of love, imperfect and real. Greg loved Rose without knowing she was Pink Diamond. He loved a woman who was keeping something fundamental from him, and he did not learn the full truth until Steven told him, which meant Steven had to be the one to process the revelation and then carry it to his father. Greg's grief when he learns the truth is different from Pearl's. It is the grief of realizing that the person you loved most was not fully honest with you. Not because they did not love you, but because they were so practiced at avoidance that honesty had become something they could no longer fully perform. The identity crisis is not resolved in a single episode or a single season. It is the engine of the show. It is the thing Steven carries in every interaction, in every encounter with a gem who knew his mother, in every moment, where he has to decide whether to accept responsibility for Pink Diamond's actions or to insist on his own separateness. And the full weight of that crisis, what it actually does to a person to carry all of this for years, did not land until the epilogue series. And what that series depicted was something that almost no cartoon has ever attempted. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this, please consider subscribing. It is completely free, and it really does help us keep making these videos. Steven Universe Future. The cost of being the hero. Steven Universe Future is 20 episodes long. It premiered on December 7th, 2019, and ended on March 27th, 2020. It is not a continuation of the main story in any traditional sense. There are no new villains invading Earth, no galactic wars to fight, no ancient mysteries to uncover. What Steven Universe Future is, and what makes it one of the bravest pieces of animated television ever produced, is a portrait of what happens to the hero after the adventure is over. When the battles are won, and the Empire has reformed, and the corrupted gems have been healed, and there is nothing left to fight. And the person who defined themselves entirely through fighting and helping and solving and saving has to figure out who they are without any of that. To understand why Future exists and why it takes the shape it takes, you need a piece of behind-the-scenes context that Rebecca Sugar has been open about in interviews. In 2016, Sugar was told that Steven Universe would be cancelled after the 5th season. The network was ending it. Sugar fought for and received permission to produce a movie, Steven Universe the movie, and 20 additional episodes. 6 of those 20 episodes were used to extend the 5th season and wrap up the main story, and the remaining 20 became Steven Universe Future. This was not the plan. Sugar had more story to tell. The ending was compressed, the epilogue was shortened, and the show that broke ground for queer representation in children's animation paid a real production cost for doing it, which we will talk about in more detail in the next section. But within those 20 episodes, Sugar and the crew did something extraordinary. They took a character who had spent 5 seasons and a movie being the emotional center of everyone else's healing. The kid who talked to the bad guys and found common ground, and healed corruption, and convinced galactic tyrants to change their ways. And they showed what all of that actually does to a person on the inside. The premise of Future is straightforward. The diamonds have reformed. They are healing corrupted gems. Homeworld is dismantling its caste system. Little Homeschool, an educational program on Earth, is helping gems learn to live freely for the first time. Steven set all of this in motion. He is the reason it happened. And now that it is happening, now that everyone around him is finding their own path and building their own life, Steven does not know what he is supposed to do anymore. This is not played as a joke or a minor character beat. It is the central crisis of the series. Steven has spent his entire conscious life being needed. He was the kid who had to mediate between the crystal gems when they argued. He was the one who healed injuries and resolved conflicts and talked people down from the edge. He was the person everyone turned to when things went wrong. And he built his entire identity around being that person. When the need goes away, when the gems are fine and the diamonds are fine and the earth is fine and even Jasper, his oldest enemy, has been healed, Steven is left with nothing to define himself against. And the nothing is terrifying. The early episodes of Future show Steven trying to fill the void. He throws himself into Little Homeschool. He tries to help gems who do not need his help. He micromanages situations that are resolving themselves perfectly fine without him. And when his help is not needed, when someone solves their own problem or makes their own choice without Steven's involvement, he does not feel relieved. He feels threatened. Because if he is not the person who helps, then who is he? The cracks start showing physically. Steven begins glowing pink when he is stressed. His body swells. He grows taller. His voice gets deeper. His strength increases to dangerous levels. These are not power-ups in the traditional animation sense. They are not the hero leveling up for a bigger fight. They are stress responses. His body is reacting to emotional pressure the same way it learned to react to physical danger. Because for Steven's entire life, emotional pressure and physical danger have been the same thing. He has spent years in situations where his feelings and his survival were connected, where the stakes were always life or death. And now his nervous system cannot tell the difference between a difficult conversation and a mortal threat. The episode that makes this explicit, the one that changes the entire framing of the series, is called Growing Pains. Steven goes to the hospital after a particularly bad episode of uncontrolled swelling, and he is examined by Dr. Priyanka Maheswaran, Connie's mother, who is a medical doctor, Dr. Maheswaran listens to Stephen describe what he has been through, and her reaction is not casual concern. It is the specific, measured alarm of a medical professional realizing that the patient in front of her has experienced what she calls adverse childhood experiences, which is a real term from actual medical and psychological literature that describes how traumatic events during childhood can negatively impact a person's long-term health and development. The show then does something that very few children's cartoons have ever done. It shows a montage of Stephen's traumatic memories. Not as flashbacks to exciting adventures, not as nostalgia for the battles he fought, as trauma, the same events that were presented as thrilling action sequences when they first aired, being attacked by corrupted gems, nearly drowning in a bubble at the bottom of the ocean, watching Pearl get poofed, watching Garnet get destabilized, being kidnapped by homeworld soldiers, watching Lars literally die, having his gem ripped from his body by White Diamond. All of it is replayed as what it actually was, a child being put through repeated life-threatening situations with no therapeutic support, no space to process what was happening, and no adult in his life who fully understood the cumulative effect of what he was absorbing. Dr. Maheswaran explains that Stephen's body has been conditioned by years of extreme stress to treat everything as an emergency. His physical symptoms, the glowing, the swelling, the uncontrolled strength, are not new powers. They are his body's trauma response, manifesting through his gem abilities. He is not getting stronger. He is breaking. This is the moment the show names what it has been documenting for 5 seasons. Stephen has PTSD. The show does not use that specific clinical term because it is still a children's cartoon, and there are limits to how clinical you can get on Cartoon Network at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night. But the show describes the condition accurately enough that any viewer who has experienced trauma or studied it recognizes exactly what is being depicted. The body responding to minor threats as if they are life-threatening. The hypervigilance. The inability to relax even when there is no danger. The desperate need to control situations because losing control once meant nearly dying. Future does not pull back from this diagnosis. The remaining episodes follow Stephen's deterioration as the people around him, the Crystal Gems, Greg, Connie, gradually realize that the kid who saved everyone else has not been saving himself. He lashes out in ways that shock the people who know him. He becomes aggressive and impulsive in ways that echo his mother's worst tendencies. He accidentally shatters Jasper during a training session, an act that horrifies him because shattering is the one thing he has always believed he would never do. The one line he thought separated him from the worst version of what a diamond could be. He heals her immediately, but the knowledge that he is capable of it, that the power in him is capable of the same destruction that Pink Diamond legacy is built on, sends him spiraling further. The penultimate episode, I Am My Monster, is where everything converges. Stephen's accumulated trauma, his self-hatred, his guilt over everything his mother did, his guilt over the things he himself has done, his exhaustion from years of carrying everyone else's emotional weight, all of it manifests physically. He transforms. Not into a bigger or stronger version of himself, into a monster, a massive corrupted gem creature, the same kind of mindless beast that the corrupting light created thousands of years ago. But this corruption did not come from an external weapon. It came from inside. Stephen corrupted himself. The people who love him surround the monster. The crystal gems, Greg, Connie, the diamonds, Spinel, everyone who has been part of Stephen's life gathers around this enormous creature, and they do not fight it. They talk to it. They apologize. Not in a generic, we are sorry way, but in specific, honest, painful ways. Greg acknowledges that he did not give Stephen the kind of stable, structured childhood that might have helped him process what he was going through. The crystal gems acknowledge that they put too much on him too young, that they relied on a child to do the emotional labor that adults should have been doing. The diamonds acknowledge that they projected their grief for Pink onto him and never fully saw him as his own person. Connie tells him she loves him. They climb onto the monster and they hold him. And Stephen, inside the creature, starts to come back. It is not a cure. The show is very clear about that. the hug does not fix PTSD. The acknowledgement does not undo years of trauma. What it does is give Steven something he has never had before in his entire life, which is the experience of being seen clearly by the people around him. Not as his mother, not as a savior, not as the person who is supposed to fix everything, but as a kid who has been through too much and needs help. The acknowledgement is the starting point, not the resolution. The final episode takes place months later. Steven is packing up his things. He is leaving Beach City. He is going to drive across the country, see the world, figure out who he is outside of the place and the people and the role that have defined him for his entire life. He mentions, casually but deliberately, that he has a therapist he can video chat with while he is on the road. He is getting professional help. He is doing the work. The show ends with Steven driving away from Beach City, not running away, leaving on his own terms, with the knowledge that the people he loves are there for him and that he needs space to become whoever he is going to be next. It is not a triumphant ending. It is not a tragic ending. It is an honest one. The hero of the story is going to therapy and taking a road trip and figuring things out, and the show treats that as a worthy conclusion to a 5-season epic about magical space rocks and intergalactic war. That arc is remarkable for a children's cartoon, but understanding why it was allowed to happen and how close it came to not happening at all requires understanding the battle that was going on behind the scenes for the show's entire existence. The censorship war. Rebecca Sugar versus Cartoon Network. Steven Universe was censored in dozens of countries across the world. Episodes were edited, scenes were cut, dialogue was removed, and in some places the show was outright banned. And in almost every single case, the reason was the same. The show depicted queer relationships, and the gatekeepers of children's television in various countries decided that queer relationships were not suitable for children to see. The documentation of this censorship is extensive and specific. The Steven Universe wiki maintains a country-by-country breakdown of every edit made to every episode in every international broadcast, and reading through it is an experience that oscillates between absurdity and genuine anger. In the United Kingdom, Cartoon Network cut a romantic dance between Pearl and Rose Quartz from the episode We Need to Talk. The same episode contained heterosexual kissing between Rose and Greg that was left completely intact. The network defended the decision by citing broadcast standards that required all content to be suitable for kids of any age at any time. Fans pointed out that the heterosexual content in the same episode apparently met that standard, while the queer content did not. And a petition on change.org gathered thousands of signatures calling for the censorship to end. In France, Garnet's song Stronger Than You, which is one of the most beloved musical moments in the show and is explicitly a love song about Ruby and Sapphire's relationship, was rewritten for the French broadcast to remove the romantic context entirely. It was turned into a song about friendship. Fan outcry was significant enough that the change was eventually reversed, but the fact that it happened at all reveals how persistent the pressure to erase queer content from children's media was during this period. In Kenya, the show was banned in 2017 for being, in the words of the band, pro-gay. In the Middle East and North Africa, the show was removed from Cartoon Network's programming in October 2016. The Steven Universe wiki notes that while the official reason was never clearly stated, the removal coincided with the show's increasingly visible LGBTQ themes. The censorship was not limited to queer content, though that was by far the most common target. Various countries edited out violence, references to death, jokes about bodily functions, and even moments of emotional distress. But the pattern is clear. The edits that were most consistently applied across the most countries were the ones that targeted same-sex romantic content, Pearl and Rose's dance, Ruby and Sapphire's relationship, the moments where the show treated queer love as normal and worthy of the same screen time as heterosexual love. But the censorship that happened after the show aired was only part of the story. The censorship that happened during production, the fight that Rebecca Sugar had to wage against their own network to get queer content into the show in the first place, is arguably more important and certainly more revealing about what it actually cost to make this show. Sugar has been open about this fight in multiple interviews, and it is documented in detail in the Steven Universe art book called End of an Era. After Sugar published The Answer, a children's book about Ruby and Sapphire's relationship, in 2016, they were pulled into a meeting at Cartoon Network and asked to explain themselves. The concerns were not stated directly. Nobody at the network said we do not want gay characters in a children's show, at least not in those words. Instead, the pushback was framed in terms of demographics and audience appeal. Will this appeal to our demographic of 6 to 11-year-old boys? Is this the kind of content our audience wants to see? Sugar pushed back. She pointed out that other Cartoon Network shows had featured weddings without controversy. Ben 10 had an alien wedding. The Powerpuff Girls had a wedding. There was no precedent for arguing that the Cartoon Network audience would not watch a wedding episode. The network then shifted its argument and claimed that it was out of character for Steven to want a wedding, despite the show having explicitly established Steven's love of weddings in the episode Open Book back in season 1. Sugar's response to each round of pushback was to make the wedding episode bigger, a major musical number, a huge fight scene, a half-hour special. Every time a concern was raised about whether the audience would be entertained, Sugar added more spectacle, more production value, more of the things that make animation expensive and impressive, until the episode was undeniable on pure entertainment terms regardless of what anyone thought about its content. At one point during these discussions, someone at the network said something that Sugar has quoted in interviews since. They said that if Steven Universe gets a gay wedding, then every show is going to want a gay wedding. And Sugar's response was yes. That was the entire point. Not just for Steven Universe to have a queer wedding, but to open the door for every show after it to do the same. The Ruby and Sapphire wedding aired in the episode Reunited, the 23rd episode of the 5th season. It was the first same-sex wedding in a Cartoon Network series. Ruby and Sapphire, two characters whose love had been established from the very beginning of the show, who the audience had watched grow and struggle and support each other across 5 seasons, got married on screen, and Sugar fought for every frame of it. The cost of that fight was real. Sugar has been open about the fact that the show's run was shortened as a direct result of pushing for LGBTQ content. The ending was compressed. The story Sugar wanted to tell had to be condensed into fewer episodes than planned. Steven Universe Future, which was supposed to be a full season, was 20 episodes. The show that broke ground for queer representation in children's animation paid a production cost for the ground it broke, but the ground stayed broken. After Steven Universe's wedding, other shows followed. She-Ra and the Princesses of Power featured a same-sex romantic relationship at its center. The Owl House featured a bisexual protagonist. Kipo and the Age of Wonder Beasts featured a gay character. The door that Sugar forced open stayed open, and the shows that walk through it have acknowledged the debt. Steven Universe did not just tell a story about queer love being normal and worth fighting for. It fought a real fight behind the scenes at real cost to prove that the story was allowed to be told. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this, please consider subscribing. It is completely free, and it really does help us keep making these videos. The hidden details, what you missed. Every show has its Easter eggs and its production trivia, and its behind-the-scenes details that reward close attention. Steven Universe has more than most, partly because the show was built by people who cared deeply about layering meaning into every element, and partly because the show's central mystery, the pink diamond reveal, required years of careful foreshadowing that only becomes visible on rewatch. Rebecca Sugar's personal life is woven into the fabric of the show at a level that goes beyond normal creator influence. Ruby and Sapphire, the two gems who fuse to form Garnet, are based directly on the real-life relationship between Sugar and Ian Jones Cordy, who was the show's supervising director and is Sugar's partner. Sugar has said in interviews that if she were a gem, she would be a ruby. Jones Cordy's creative energy and personality are reflected in Sapphire's calm certainty. The relationship at the heart of the show's most important fusion is modeled on the relationship at the heart of its production. There is a detail about Sugar's personal history that the show references in a way that is easy to miss. When Rebecca Sugar was born, her parents considered naming her Nora. She later used that name in the episode Lion for alternate ending as the name Stephen would have had if he had been born female. The alternate version of Stephen's life, the path not taken, carries the name that Sugar herself almost had. It is the kind of detail that means nothing if you do not know the context and means everything if you do. Sugar has a pet cat named Lion. The character of Lion in the show, the mysterious pink feline that Stephen rides around on and that turns out to have a pocket dimension inside his mane containing Rose Quartz's most important possessions, is named after Sugar's actual cat, which means that one of the show's most important mythological figures, the animal that connects Stephen to his mother's hidden past, is named after the creator's pet. The gem types used in the show are based on real mineralogical properties, and the show's engagement with actual gemology runs deeper than surface level naming. Pink diamonds are exceedingly rare in nature, far rarer than red diamonds, which has led to fan speculation that pink diamond may have been an anomaly within the Diamond Authority, a gem that should not have existed in the form she took. One fan theory that has gained traction uses color theory to explain pink's existence. Blue and yellow make green. If you subtract green from white light, you are left with pink. Under this reading, pink diamond is not an independent entity but a byproduct of the relationship between the other three diamonds, which adds an interesting dimension to the question of why she was always treated as the youngest and least important. There is an element of the show's design philosophy that Ian Jones Cordy has spoken about publicly. He added stars to the series logo early in development because he saw them as a versatile symbol. The star appears on the crystal gems outfits on Stephen's shirt throughout the visual language of the show, as a recurring motif that ties the human and gem worlds together. Jones Cordy later said he overused them and that the team received criticism for the extent of the star motif, but the symbol became iconic enough that it is now inseparable from the show's identity. In 2020, Maya Peterson, a storyboarder for Steven Universe Future, confirmed that Peridot's disinterest in fusion was intended to represent asexuality and aromanticism. When Sugar was asked separately whether Peridot might be autistic, they said something genuinely interesting. Sugar said they do not think of any of the gems as neurotypical, and that they were thrilled that autistic viewers could relate to Peridot. It is a response that manages to be both inclusive and specific, acknowledging the connection viewers feel without reducing a character to a single diagnosis. The song Love Like You, which plays over the end credits of every episode, was written by Sugar over the course of the entire series. The song's perspective shifted as Sugar's understanding of the characters evolved. It began as a song from Rose's perspective, expressing uncertainty about whether she deserved the love she received, and over the course of the show's production it expanded to encompass multiple characters and multiple kinds of love and self-doubt. The song was written in pieces across years, and its emotional resonance deepened as the show's themes became clearer, which means the end credits of the show were quietly evolving alongside the story in a way that no casual viewer would have noticed. The show earned a Peabody Award in 2018, which is awarded for stories that demonstrate the power of media to inform, educate, and enlighten. It earned a GLAAD Media Award in 2019 for Outstanding Kids and Family Program. Sugar has received 7 Primetime Emmy nominations across their career for work on Steven Universe and Adventure Time. In 2025, a South American flower of the genus Camelina was named Camelina sugariae in honor of Sugar's artistic achievements. The creator of a show about alien gemstones now has a real flower named after them. which feels like exactly the kind of quiet, beautiful detail that belongs in a Steven Universe episode. These details are lovely on their own. They reward the kind of close attention that the show itself trains you to give. But there is one more element of the show that sits between the hidden details and the deepest thematic layers, and it is the one that catches people off guard more than anything else about Steven Universe: the music. Steven Universe is, quietly and without making a big deal about it, one of the most musically ambitious animated series ever produced. Rebecca Sugar wrote or co-wrote the majority of the show's songs, and there are a lot of them. Across 5 seasons, a movie, and an epilogue, the show contains well over 100 musical moments, ranging from 30-second character songs to full production numbers with choreography and multiple vocalists. And the remarkable thing about the music is not the quantity, it is the specificity. Every song in Steven Universe is doing emotional work that the dialogue cannot do alone. Stronger Than You, performed by Estelle as Garnet during a fight with Jasper in the season 1 finale, is the show's most famous musical moment and one of the most important songs in the history of animated television. On the surface, it is a battle anthem. Garnet is fighting Jasper, a homeworld soldier who considers Garnet's existence as a fusion to be disgusting and unnatural, and the song is Garnet's response. She is stronger than Jasper. She is going to win this fight. But the lyrics are not really about combat. They are a love song. They are Garnet singing about what Ruby and Sapphire have together, about the fact that their bond is what makes her strong, about the specific power that comes from being loved fully by someone who sees you completely. This is the song that Cartoon Network France rewrote to remove the romantic context and make it about friendship. This is the song that fans fought to get restored. And the reason the censorship mattered so much is that the song is not incidental to the story. It is the story. It is the show's thesis about the relationship between love and strength, expressed as a 3-minute pop song during an action sequence. And removing the love removes everything. Here Comes a Thought, performed in the episode Mindful Education, is a song about anxiety and intrusive thoughts set inside a meditation sequence, where Stevonnie, the fusion of Steven and Connie, must confront painful memories that are threatening to overwhelm them. The song walks through the process of experiencing a distressing thought, acknowledging it without running from it and allowing it to pass. It is, in functional terms, a guided meditation set to music inside a children's cartoon, and it works because the show has done the groundwork of making the viewer care about these characters deeply enough that their internal emotional states feel as high stakes as any fight scene. It's Over, Isn't It? Performed by Dee Dee Magno Hall as Pearl in the episode Mr. Greg, is a Broadway-style number about grief and jealousy and the specific pain of loving someone who chose someone else. Pearl is singing about Rose, about the fact that Rose chose Greg, about the fact that Rose is gone, and the competition for her heart that Pearl spent thousands of years in is over, and Pearl lost, and the losing is permanent. The song is gorgeous and devastating, and it aired on Cartoon Network at a time slot designed for children. And the emotional complexity of what it is expressing, a queer character grieving a relationship that was never fully reciprocated and never properly ended because the other person ceased to exist, is something that primetime adult dramas struggle to handle with this much nuance. The movie's villain song, Other Friends, performed by Sarah Styles as Spinel, is a Charleston-influenced number that somehow manages to be both infectiously fun and deeply unsettling at the same time. Spinel is singing about the fact that Pink Diamond replaced her, found new friends, forgot about her entirely, and the song bounces between cheerful energy and barely contained rage in a way that communicates Spinel's psychological state more effectively than any amount of dialogue could. And then there is the song that ties the entire show together. Love Like You plays over the end credits of every episode. Sugar wrote it across the full production of the series, composing new sections as the show evolved. And the song's emotional register shifted as Sugar's understanding of what the show was about deepened. It started as a song from Rose's perspective, an expression of inadequacy and wonder at being loved by someone she felt she did not deserve. Over time, it grew into something bigger, a song about the universal experience of being loved by someone and not quite understanding why, of looking at yourself through another person's eyes and not recognizing the person they see. The song is never performed inside the show itself. It lives only in the credits, playing over the end card of every episode, a few bars at a time, building across years of television into a complete piece that most viewers hear in fragments without ever hearing the whole. It is the show's emotional architecture expressed as music, built piece by piece over the same timeline as the story it accompanies, and it is the single most Rebecca Sugar thing about the entire franchise. A love song written slowly, over years, about the gap between how you see yourself and how the person who loves you sees you. Hidden in the credits, where only the people who keep watching after the episode ends will hear it. The music is not decoration. It is not filler between plot beats. It is the show's primary emotional delivery system, the mechanism through which the heaviest feelings are expressed. And it is one of the main reasons Steven Universe sticks with people the way it does. You can forget plot details. You can forget episode numbers and character names and the specifics of which Diamond did what. But if you have heard Stronger Than You or Love Like You or It's Over, Isn't It, those melodies stay. They sit in your head years after you watched the episodes they came from, carrying the emotional weight of the scenes they accompanied. And they surface at unexpected moments when something in your own life brushes against the same feelings the songs were written about. The deepest level of the iceberg is not about hidden details or production trivia. It is about the argument the show has been making since its very first episode, an argument about what it actually costs to love someone who hurt people, and whether that love is worth holding onto when the person is gone and the damage is still here. The Pink Diamond problem. Is forgiveness possible? Pink Diamond is the most morally complicated character in Steven Universe. She is not the most powerful, she is not the most dangerous, she is not the character with the most screen time or the most dramatic arc or the most spectacular fight scenes. What she is and what makes her the gravitational center of the entire show, even though she is dead before the first episode begins, is the character the show refuses to simplify. Every time a viewer or a character within the show tries to reduce Pink Diamond to a single judgment, good or bad, hero or villain, victim or abuser, the show adds another layer that makes that judgment harder to hold on to. Start with what she did right, because the show does not pretend that she did nothing right. Pink Diamond saw what gem colonization was doing to Earth and she tried to stop it. She appealed to the other diamonds first, going through what she believed were the proper channels, asking them to spare the planet. They said no. They told her Earth was just a colony, just a resource, and that her attachment to the organic life on it was sentimental and beneath what a diamond should concern herself with. When the legitimate avenues failed, she took a different approach. She invented Rose Quartz, a persona that allowed her to fight the colonization from the ground level, to stand with the gems who did not want to destroy this planet, and to lead a resistance against the empire she was part of. She valued organic life. She saw beauty in the impermanence and growth and constant change of living things, qualities that gem society, with its static perfection and eternal sameness, had no language for. She fell in love with humans, at first as a concept and then as individuals, ultimately falling in love with Greg Universe in a way that was real and reciprocal and complicated by the enormous gap in experience and understanding between a being who has lived for thousands of years and a man who plays guitar in a van. She chose to create Steven, knowing it would mean the end of her own existence, because she believed that a hybrid being, half gem and half human, could be something new, something free of the patterns she had been trapped in, something better than she had been. Those are real things. They are not nothing. The impulse behind them to protect, to grow, to create something free is genuine. Now look at what she did wrong, because the show does not pretend about that either. She lied to everyone who loved her for thousands of years. She created a fake identity and sustained it for millennia, allowing the people closest to her to build their entire understanding of who she was around a fiction. Pearl, who loved her more deeply than almost any other character in the show loves anyone, was not just lied to. Pearl was made complicit in the lie and then physically prevented from revealing it. Pink Diamond's last command as a diamond was to seal Pearl's mouth, to take away her ability to speak the truth, which is an act of control disguised as an act of protection. Pink probably believed she was protecting Pearl. The effect was that Pearl spent thousands of years unable to express the most significant truth of her existence. She abandoned Spinel for 6,000 years. We have already covered this in detail, but it bears repeating in this context because the Spinel situation is not an isolated incident. It is a pattern. Pink Diamond's consistent response to difficult situations was avoidance. She did not confront problems directly. She found ways around them. She faked her death instead of confronting the other diamonds. She sealed Pearl's mouth instead of trusting Pearl to keep the secret willingly. She told Spinel to wait instead of having the conversation that would have been uncomfortable but honest. And she left her son with all of the unresolved consequences of every avoidance she had ever practiced, without leaving him any of the information he would need to understand what he was inheriting. She colonized Earth. This is a detail that the Pink Diamond discourse sometimes glosses over because the show's narrative emphasis is on her decision to stop the colonization. But she started it. She begged the other diamonds for a colony and they gave her Earth, and she began the process of building kindergartens and draining the planet's life force. The kindergartens that produced amethyst and jasper and the other Earth quartzes were Pink Diamond's project. She started the thing she later fought against, which is morally complicated in a way that simple heroism or simple villainy cannot contain. She created the human zoo. When Pink Diamond still had her colony, she created an orbiting zoo where humans were collected and kept as living specimens, maintained in a state of perpetual innocence and compliance, fed and cared for and gently managed like animals in an enclosure. The zoo was created out of Pink's genuine fascination with humans, which is part of what makes it disturbing. She loved humans enough to want to preserve them, and not enough to recognize that what she was preserving them from, the destruction of their planet, was something she was causing. The show refuses to let you simplify any of this. Every time a character tries to reduce Pink Diamond to a single moral category, the show complicates it. Bismuth, who fought in the rebellion and was bubbled by Rose for thousands of years for suggesting they shatter the diamonds, calls Pink a traitor and a liar. She is not wrong about either of those things. Jasper, who served Pink Diamond during the war and never recovered from losing her, worships the ground Pink walked on and considers the rebellion a personal betrayal. She is also not wrong. Pearl is devastated by the truth and also deeply protective of Pink's memory. She can hold the grief and the love simultaneously because she lived inside both of them for thousands of years. Stephen himself goes through multiple phases of processing his mother's legacy. There is a period where he is angry, furious, where every new piece of information about what Pink Diamond did feels like a personal betrayal because it is his gem, his body, his life that carries the consequences. There is a period where he tries to understand, where he attempts to hold the complexity of a person who did terrible things and genuine things and selfish things and brave things all at once. And there is a period, mostly in future, where the weight of carrying someone else's legacy becomes too much, and the processing collapses into something that looks more like exhaustion than resolution. The show's position on Pink Diamond, to the extent that it has one, is delivered not through a single speech or a single moment, but through the accumulation of evidence across 5 seasons, a movie, and an epilogue series. And that position is something like this. Pink Diamond was a person who caused enormous harm while genuinely trying to do something good. She was trapped in a system that did not allow her to grow, and she found a way out of that system that left destruction in every direction. She loved people and she hurt people, and she did both of those things to the same people at the same time. She was not a hero, she was not a villain. She was a person with power and good intentions and terrible judgment, and a pathological inability to face difficult truths directly. The show asks you to hold all of that at once. It does not tell you how to feel about it. It does not offer a final verdict. It presents the evidence and lets you sit with it, which is the most respectful thing a story can do with a morally complicated character and also the most uncomfortable. And underneath the specific question of Pink Diamond is a more universal one that the show has been asking the whole time. What do you do when someone you love, someone who shaped you, someone whose choices created the conditions of your existence, was a deeply flawed person? Do you owe them forgiveness? Do you owe them anger? Is it possible to love someone and be honest about the damage they caused at the same time? And if you are the one who inherited the damage, who lives inside the consequences every day, what does healing look like when the person who hurt you is gone and cannot apologize and cannot change and cannot be confronted? Stephen does not forgive Pink Diamond in the sense of declaring her absolved. What he does, across the full arc of the show, is reach a place where he can acknowledge what she was, without letting it determine what he becomes. He carries her gem. He does not have to carry her patterns. The avoidance, the lying, the running, the inability to face difficult things directly, those are things he inherited, and they are also things he can choose to put down. The show argues that the work of putting them down is the actual story, not the origin of the damage, but the process of learning to live with it differently. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this, please consider subscribing. It is completely free and it really does help us keep making these videos. The Diamond Days, abusers, reform, and whether people actually change. The most controversial aspect of Steven Universe's ending is not the Pink Diamond reveal. It is not the censorship. It is not the pacing of the final episodes or the compressed timeline or the specific details of how any particular character's arc resolves. The most controversial thing the show ever did was let the diamonds change. White Diamond, Yellow Diamond, and Blue Diamond ran a genocidal empire. They colonized and destroyed thousands of planets. They enforced a rigid caste system that denied billions of gems any form of individuality or self-determination. They unleashed the corrupting light on Earth, which turned hundreds of gems into mindless monsters. White Diamond could control other gems by forcing her consciousness into their bodies, overwriting their personalities with her own. Blue Diamond weaponized grief, projecting her emotions onto others without their consent. Yellow Diamond ran the military apparatus that carried out the Empire's worst acts of violence, with efficient, uncomplaining precision. These are not minor antagonists who did one bad thing and got called out for it. These are beings who sustained a system of oppression for millions of years across a galaxy-spanning empire. And Stephen, a teenager with a pink gem in his stomach, convinced them to stop. He talked to them. He appealed to their capacity for change. He reminded them that they had loved Pink Diamond and that their grief over losing her had been real, and he argued that if they were capable of love, then they were capable of growth. And they listened. They stopped. They began dismantling the caste system, healing corrupted gems and attempting to be something other than what they had been. The backlash from a significant portion of the fan base was intense and in many cases entirely understandable. The argument goes something like this. You cannot redeem a dictator with a conversation. You cannot undo a galactic genocide with a family therapy session. Showing cosmic scale abusers being forgiven and welcomed into the family because a child asked them nicely sends the message that victims owe their abusers patience and compassion, that abusers will change if you just love them enough, and that the appropriate response to systemic oppression is individual, emotional labor performed by the people who were oppressed. These are legitimate criticisms, and the show does not fully answer all of them. The scope of what the Diamonds did is so large that any resolution was going to feel inadequate to the scale of the harm, and the show's compressed timeline, forced by the production circumstances we discussed earlier, meant that the Diamond's transformation had to happen faster than it might have if Sugar had been given the full run they originally planned. But there is a reading of the Diamond resolution that is more nuanced than the criticism sometimes allows for, and it comes from paying attention to what Sugar was actually arguing, rather than what the story's mechanics look like on the surface. Sugar's position, expressed across multiple interviews, is not that abusers deserve forgiveness. It is that people are capable of change and that a child should not bear the responsibility of punishing the people who hurt them. Stephen is not a judge. He is not the galactic equivalent of a war crimes tribunal. He is a kid who was trying to survive a situation that was created before he was born by people whose decisions he had no input into. His approach to the diamonds, empathy rather than punishment, dialogue rather than violence, is not presented as the morally correct approach for all situations everywhere. It is presented as what this specific kid, with this specific set of powers and this specific emotional makeup, was capable of doing. And the show is honest about the fact that Stephen's approach comes at a cost to Stephen himself. In the epilogue series, Future, the consequences of Stephen's approach to the diamonds are visible. The diamonds have reformed. They are trying. Blue Diamond is using her emotional powers to help others process grief, rather than inflicting it on them. Yellow Diamond is using her powers to restructure gem bodies, helping corrupted and damaged gems restore themselves. White Diamond is attempting to use her consciousness, sharing ability to help others rather than to control them. The inversion of their powers, from weapons into healing tools, was something Sugar discussed specifically in an interview with IO9, explaining that the team wanted to invert everything that the diamonds were, to show that the same capacities that made them destructive could be redirected towards something constructive. But when Stephen interacts with the reformed diamonds in Future, the show does not pretend that the relationship is comfortable or healthy or resolved. White Diamond's new powers are explicitly described as not good for Stephen when they are turned on him. Confronting himself through White Diamond's ability is deeply distressing. The diamonds are trying to change, and their trying is genuine, and the process of that change is still difficult and messy and sometimes harmful to the people around them. The show is not saying that the diamonds' reform is complete, or that it erases what they did. It is saying that change is possible, that it is ongoing, that it does not happen all at once, and that the process of changing does not automatically repair the relationships that were damaged before the change began. The diamonds can become better, and still be complicated, and still be sources of discomfort, and still have a long way to go. All of those things can be true at once. There is a deeper reading of the diamond situation that connects to the show's larger themes about family. The diamonds are, in the most basic structural sense, Stephen's extended family. They are his mother's sisters, or the closest thing Gem Society has to that concept. And the question the show is really asking with their reform is one that echoes through many viewers' real lives. What do you do when a family member who harmed you is genuinely trying to change? Do you owe them a relationship? Can you accept their change without fully trusting them? Can you appreciate the effort while still being honest about the pain? The show does not offer a clean answer because clean answers to that question do not exist in real life. Some people can maintain relationships with family members who are changing, and some people cannot, and both of those responses are valid, and the show seems to understand that. Stephen maintains his relationship with the diamonds, but Future shows that maintaining it costs him something. The labor of being the bridge between a reformed empire and the people that empire hurt is not free, and it should not have been his job in the first place. And the show eventually names that as part of what breaks him. Whether you think the diamonds reform works as a narrative choice or not is a genuine question with genuine arguments on both sides. But what is harder to argue with is the honesty of the conversation the show is trying to have. It is grappling with a real and genuinely difficult moral question, one that many people face in some form in their own lives, and it is doing so in a children's cartoon on Cartoon Network, which is either wildly ambitious or slightly insane or both. It is worth noting that the show's handling of change and redemption works far more convincingly on a smaller scale, and the proof of that is Peridot. Peridot arrives on Earth as a homeworld technician sent to check on the cluster, a geo-weapon made from the shattered remains of fallen gems that was buried inside the Earth and designed to destroy the planet when it emerged. She is cold and efficient and treats the crystal gems as inferior and treats the Earth as a resource to be managed. She is everything the caste system was designed to produce, a gem who defines herself entirely by her function and who cannot imagine being anything else. And then, slowly, over the course of multiple episodes, she changes. Not because Steven gives a speech, not because someone forces her to reconsider, but because she is exposed to a world where gems can be things their kindergartens never intended, where a garnet can exist as a fusion of love rather than a tool of war, where an amethyst can be small and wild and nothing like what a quartz is supposed to be and still be valued. Peridot discovers that she likes art. She discovers that she has opinions about television shows and that those opinions matter to the people around her. She discovers that the Earth has things on it that Homeworld's systems cannot replicate or replace, and that she cares about those things in ways she was never designed to care. Her redemption works because the show gives it time and because the show makes Peridot earn it through specific visible choices, rather than a single dramatic conversion. She calls Yellow Diamond a clod on a direct communication channel, which is the gem equivalent of telling your boss to go to hell on a company-wide video call. She chooses the crystal gems over Homeworld, not because she has been convinced that Homeworld is philosophically wrong, but because the specific people in front of her, the specific gems she has come to care about, are worth choosing. Peridot's arc is the show's proof of concept for the idea that people shaped by oppressive systems can change when they are given room to discover what they actually want, rather than what the system told them to want. And it is the reason that the Diamond's reform, while more compressed and more controversial, sits inside a show that has already demonstrated its understanding of how change actually works. The cluster itself, the geo-weapon buried in the Earth, becomes one of the show's most unexpectedly moving storylines. Steven literally goes inside the Earth and talks to the cluster, which is made up of millions of shattered gem fragments, forced together against their will. And he helps them find peace by choosing to form connections with each other voluntarily, rather than being forced into a monstrous whole. It is a metaphor for consent, and for the difference between connection that is imposed and connection that is chosen, and the show buries it deep underground where only the people willing to dig that far will find it. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this, please consider subscribing. It is completely free, and it really does help us keep making these videos. And underneath all of this, the Diamond Reform, the identity crisis, the censorship wars, the hidden details, underneath every layer of this iceberg we have been moving through tonight, sits the thing the show was actually about from the very beginning. The argument it has been making since the first episode, through every adventure and every loss and every terrible decision and every moment of unexpected tenderness. An argument about what it means to inherit the unfinished business of the people who came before you, and whether the love that survives all of that damage is real enough to build something on. The bottom of the iceberg. What Steven Universe is actually about. There is a moment in the first season of Steven Universe, in the 11th episode, that if you watch it the first time around means almost nothing. Steven and the crystal gems are at a party. It is a light, fun, early season episode that is mostly about Steven trying to help Lars feel comfortable at a social event. And in the middle of it, there is a small beat where Bird Person, no, that is the other show, where Steven's friend and neighbor helps translate something and the scene passes in seconds. Actually, we are the crystal gems. We will always save the day. And if you think we can't, we will always find a way. It sounds triumphant. It sounds heroic. It sounds like the thesis statement of an adventure cartoon about good guys who always win. But if you listen to that theme song after watching the entire show, after knowing what the crystal gems actually went through, after knowing the truth about Rose Quartz and the gem war, and the corrupting light, and the thousands of years of managing damage and the identity crisis and the lies and the grief, the same words sound different. We will always find a way. Is not a statement of confidence. It is a statement of desperation. It is what people say when they have been through enough that finding a way is the only option left because the alternatives, giving up, lying down, letting the damage win, are not things they can afford to do. The show knows this. The theme song was not written as ironic counterpoint to the show's darker themes. It was written as an expression of the same emotional truth that the show explores across 5 seasons, a movie, and an epilogue. The crystal gems are not optimistic because everything is fine. They are optimistic because everything is not fine and has never been fine, and optimism is the tool they use to keep going. Every adventure, every song, every moment where Steven summons his shield or talks a villain down from a fight or holds someone while they cry, all of it is happening inside this frame. The crystal gems are survivors of a war that destroyed almost everyone they knew. They are 3 women, or 3 beings who present as women and who use she and her pronouns, raising a child in a small town on a planet that came within days of being destroyed multiple times, carrying the memory of a leader who lied to them, in a war they won at terrible cost and a corrupting light that took their friends from them. And there, the show traces a chain of damage across multiple generations and shows how pain that is not processed gets passed from person to person, changing shape, but never losing force, until someone in the chain decides to do the work of actually facing it. The chain starts with the diamonds. White, yellow, and blue diamond created a civilization built on control and conformity. They did this not out of pure malice, but out of a worldview that could not accommodate difference or growth or change. Gems were made for a purpose, and they fulfilled that purpose forever. Deviation was a defect. Individuality was a threat. The diamonds built an empire that reflected their own inability to tolerate anything they could not predict or control. And they enforced that empire with violence and with a caste system that denied billions of beings the chance to become anything other than what they were made to be. Pink Diamond was the youngest product of that system. She was created by the same diamonds who enforced the caste system, raised inside the same rigidity, subject to the same expectations, and she was the one who could not fit. She was too small, too emotional, too interested in things that did not matter to the Empire. She asked questions the other diamonds did not want to hear. She cared about things the system was designed to ignore. She was, in the language the show uses, off, not defective in the way that off-color gems are defective, but fundamentally misaligned with the world she was made for. Her response to that misalignment was not healthy. She did not confront it directly. She did not stand before the other diamonds and demand change and accept the consequences. Instead, she found workarounds. She invented a persona, she started a secret war, she faked her death. She changed her name and her appearance and her entire identity rather than doing the harder thing, which would have been to remain Pink Diamond and fight for change as herself. Every choice she made was a form of avoidance, and every avoidance created new damage. The damage she created was inherited by the crystal gems, who spent thousands of years building their identity around a lie they did not know was a lie. It was inherited by Pearl, who carried a secret she could not speak. It was inherited by Garnet, who believed in a leader who was not who she said she was. It was inherited by Amethyst, who grew up in the shadow of a war she had no part in, and whose very existence was the result of a kindergarten that should never have been built. And it was inherited by Steven, who received all of it, every piece, every consequence, every unresolved feeling and unspoken truth and unpaid debt, bundled together inside a pink gemstone that sits in his stomach. Steven did not choose any of this. He was born into it. He was born into a family that loved him and also could not fully see him, because they were still processing the loss of the person he was supposed to replace. He was born into a house that was built on top of a temple, that was built on top of a battlefield, that was the site of a war that was started by a lie that was told by the person whose gem he carries. Every layer of his existence, physical and emotional and historical, is built on foundations that someone else laid, and none of it was his choice. And the show argues quietly and consistently across its entire run that this is not Steven's fault, but it is Steven's responsibility. Not in the sense that he owes a debt for his mother's sins. Not in the sense that he should feel guilty for existing. But in the sense that the damage is here, in his life, in his relationships, in his body, and pretending it is not there or running away from it or avoiding it the way Pink Diamond avoided everything is not going to make it go away. The only thing that makes it go away, or at least makes it manageable, is facing it. Steven faces it. Badly, sometimes. Imperfectly. With a lot of falling down and getting back up and falling down again. He faces it by talking to the diamonds when everyone around him thinks the diamonds are beyond reaching. He faces it by telling Bismuth the truth about what Rose did to her, even though the truth is painful. He faces it by accepting that his mother was complicated and that he can love the parts of her that were worth loving without pretending the parts that were harmful did not exist. He faces it by going to therapy, eventually, when the weight of everything he has been carrying becomes too much for him to manage alone. And here is the thing about Steven that the show gets right and that a lot of stories about generational trauma get wrong. Steven does not break the cycle by being strong. He does not break the cycle by being smart or brave or powerful enough to overcome the damage through sheer force of will. He breaks the cycle by doing the thing that Pink Diamond could never do. He asks for help. He admits that he cannot carry this by himself. He lets the people around him see him as he actually is, not as a savior or a leader or a hero, but as a person who is struggling, and he allows them to help. Pink Diamond could not do that. She could not be vulnerable. She could not admit weakness. She could not trust the people she loved enough to tell them the truth. Her entire existence was a performance of confidence and control and self-sufficiency that hid a person who was drowning underneath it. And the show argues that it was precisely this inability to ask for help, this refusal to be honest about her own limitations and struggles, that caused the damage that cascaded through every relationship she ever had and eventually landed on her son. Steven's act of allowing himself to be helped, the moment in I Am My Monster where the corrupted monster that he has become is surrounded by the people who love him and they acknowledge their failures and he lets them reach him, is the show's emotional thesis stated as action rather than dialogue. The cycle breaks not through strength but through vulnerability. Not through solving the problem, but through admitting that the problem is too big to solve alone. That is what the show is about. Not magical space rocks, not galactic war, not fusions or kindergartens or the Diamond Authority or the corrupting light. All of those things are the surface, the brilliant, inventive, visually stunning, musically gorgeous surface that makes Steven Universe one of the great achievements of modern animation. But underneath that surface, all the way down at the bottom of the iceberg, there is a story about a child who inherited the consequences of his mother's inability to be honest, and who found his way to a different ending by doing the one thing she never could. He asked for help. He let himself be seen, and then he got in his car and drove away to figure out who he is without the weight. The show that started with a kid singing about ice cream sandwiches ended with a teenager going to therapy and learning that the hardest part of saving the world is learning to save yourself. And Rebecca Sugar fought for every frame of it. There is one more thing worth knowing, and it is the newest piece of this story. On June 11th, 2025, at the Annecy International Animation Film Festival in France, Rebecca Sugar stood on a stage and announced that they were coming back. A sequel series, Steven Universe Lars of the Stars, is in development for Prime Video. Cartoon Network Studios is producing it. Sugar and Ian Jones, Quarty, are executive producing together. The new show follows Lars Barriga, the character who started the series as a cynical, insecure teenager working at a donut shop, and who ended it as the captain of a spaceship, a literal space pirate, who had died and been brought back to life, and who left Earth to explore the universe with the off-color gems who would become his crew and his family. The official description says that Lars of the Stars will follow Lars as an eternal teenager and space outlaw, as he and his pirate crew smuggle contraband, evade the authorities, and uncover the darkest secrets of the fallen Gem Empire. Sugar told the audience at Annecy that she misses her world and her characters. She told the Wrap in an interview the same day that those characters and that world are really, really important to her. And she said the thing that she has been saying in various forms since the original show ended. the thing that is probably the most Steven Universe sentiment possible. She wants to come back to this world because there is more story to tell and because the characters she created deserve the chance to keep growing. Sugar told the AV Club in 2019. Around the time the movie came out, something that feels like the show's final word on what it believes. I really wanted the big takeaway to be that it is okay to be a work in progress. There is this sort of false promise made by stories that there is going to be an end. But you do not stop growing. If you want to stop growing, it is going to be really hard when bad things keep happening. The thing about the fact that we are all always growing is that it is really an incredible opportunity every day to figure out how to be more and more of the person that you want to be. That is the bottom of the iceberg, and that is what was down here the whole time. A show about a boy with a gem in his stomach and a dead mother whose lies shaped the world he was born into, and the people who loved him imperfectly and hurt him unintentionally and stood around his broken body when the weight of it all finally crushed him and said, "We see you, we are sorry. We are here." And a boy who heard them and came back and got in his car and drove toward a version of himself that he had not met yet, but that he was finally ready to become. Steven Universe is a show about magical space rocks. It is also one of the most honest things ever made about what it costs to love someone, what it costs to be loved by someone who is in pain, and what it takes to stop passing the pain along. And the fact that it was made at all, that Rebecca Sugar fought for it against a network that tried to silence its most important stories. That it exists in a world where a children's cartoon about queer alien gemstones won a Peabody Award and changed the landscape of animated television permanently is its own kind of miracle. The kind of miracle that happens not because the universe is kind, but because one person refused to stop pushing until the door opened far enough for everyone behind them to walk through. If you are still awake, thank you for staying with me through all 12 sections of this. If you are drifting off, that is exactly what this was for. Either way, I'm glad you were here. If you enjoyed this, subscribe. We make more long-form content like this, and there is always more to talk about.